Welcome to Toot Your Own Horn, Music Matters. I am so excited today to have David Young. Hi, David. How are you?
Hey, Lisa.
Long time no see. David, you and I go way back, and I'm so excited to have you on this podcast because you are such a talented musician. And I was wondering if you would tell our audience how you started to play the first instrument you chose and then went on because you are an incredible doubler.
Why, thank you. Because when I was a little kid, I had this fascination with music. I would, something had come on the TV, I'd stop dead in my tracks and listen. So when it got time, when I started grade school, I was 6 at that point, and I did nothing but talk about joining bands. So when I was in second grade at 7, they decided to let me join the band. So I went to, they try you on the different instruments and everything. And I wanted to play the flute.
Mm.
And that hasn't changed to this day. That's what I wanted to do. But I was told, no, that's for little girls. Here, have a saxophone. So that's how I ended up on saxophone originally, even though I wanted flute. So then, okay, so I start on saxophone, beginners band, and everything. Then by the time I got to third grade, the band director there was something he wanted to use. We had no lower woodwinds at all in the band, so he wanted me to play bari sax. And I'm like, it's still to this day, I don't want anything to do with the beast.
Right.
So he said, jokingly, he says, well, how about bass clarinet? And he said, we have one here you can use if you can learn it. So I said, okay. So I came back the next day and he gave me a fingering chart and the parts to the music. I came back the next day and learned all the parts according to the fingering chart.
Oh my gosh.
So my first experience on clarinet was a bass clarinet.
Oh.
Then in about seventh grade, I had my mom's cousin worked for a Musart music company. So he got me some old junker that he had the guy fix up a clarinet and a flute
Mhm.
because I still wanted to play the flute. So he got me both of those and I started playing those, just picked it up on my own in about seventh grade.
Oh my gosh.
So by the time I was done in grade school, I had played flute, clarinet, and saxophone. So then we got into high school. I never knew anything about musicals or anything. And they start doing the musicals, and there's all these same instruments in one book.
Mhm.
And that's what I learned. It's like, oh, that's the way they do it. So I was able to actually play the book as written rather than divide it up amongst people like they normally do. I think the first year they had other people on the book also, just, to see what happened. But then after that, I just played the books myself.
Wow.
Then later, I went to Northwestern, and here I am, this little freshman, and John Painter's auditioning people for the WAMU show.
Hmm.
So then he's asking people, do you play the oboe? And I'd never touched the thing. And he says, we're having trouble finding anybody. So I just said yes, even though I'd never touched it. So I said yes. And so I figured at that point, I had about 6 months, I could learn enough to learn the parts. Well, it wasn't that easy getting an oboe, as I found out, because here I was a freshman in college, didn't have much money, so so you had to rent one for a minimum of 6 months.
Hmm.
So I didn't have the money to do that. So we get down to 2 days before I'm supposed to play this thing. Now, I had a friend of mine, Peter Cooper, this amazing oboe player. He made me a few reeds. I had reeds, but I had no oboe. And everybody was looking. Finally, 2 days before, an oboe major at Northwestern comes in, she goes, I know this isn't exactly a great horn, but I found this. It's an old ancient oboe I had with ring keys like a clarinet yet.
Oh.
So that's what I used. And in 2 days, I learned the parts to play that was recorded. Actually, I still have the vinyl, was recorded 2 weeks later.
Oh my God.
So that was my experience with oboe, which turned out to be the smartest thing I ever did in my entire life. Because there's a lot of doublers out there, flute, clarinet, saxophone, but there really are very few oboe doublers who also play oboe English horn, or if you're on the lower end, bassoon.
Right.
So I played it for the thing at Northwestern. Then I only used it for that. Then I didn't again till several years later when I had start after sophomore year. I was going to take a year off because Wally Kujala, the flute teacher, was asking me if I was interested in switching to a flute major because I also played a lot of flute when I was at Northwestern. That's what I always wanted to do. But Fred Hemke, my saxophone teacher, who I had studied with since sophomore year in high school, had gotten me this amazing full scholarship and everything. And I'm like, how can I do that? I decided to take junior year off. And during that year, I got hooked up in theater, never planning this. And I never went back because I worked from when I started until I retired.
I didn't know that you actually didn't graduate.
No, I only went 2 years. And the third year, actually, they were doing West Side Story. Megan Mullally was Anita
Uh-huh.
in our production. And so I said, oh, well, what do I need to do to just play the show? And they said, you need to sign up for 2 classes. So I signed up for lessons in band. Then I did the show. Then I quit for
Oh,
the year. I wanted to do the show so bad. Oh, getting back to the oboe, I almost forgot. I did a show at Candlelight, Gypsy. Then they were doing Fiddler. Then they were doing Follies by Sondheim, which I had never heard. So I got the recording, fell in love. It's to this day my favorite show of all time. And I decided, okay, now I'm really going to learn oboe and English horn because it had such amazing parts. So I learned it at that point specifically for that show. And again, that's what's all these years has kept me going because there are very few oboe doublers. And I learned oboe as if it was my primary instrument through classical symphony with Joe Glimpf, as
yeah,
that's where we originally met.
that's right.
So that's what I was doing at the time. I was just learning oboe. I was really just learning it for that show, but then I stayed with it, I stayed with classical for a few years after that because it was so beneficial in helping me get to a level where I feel it's my principal instrument.
Mhm.
From there, I kept working in theater in Chicago, went to the Candlelight Dinner Theater for
Mhm.
a number of years, went on the road for a year with the show Gigi, and then came back and I did repairs for you at your shop in Mount Prospect for a while there when I was still playing. I started working all the theaters in Chicago. At that point, I had been doing the American Girl show in the doll store for about 5 years. And they were opening a store and show in New York. And they offered me the job. And the day before, I had turned it down because I hadn't been to New York since like 1987 at that point. And
Mhm.
I remember the old New York, and it wasn't a place I wanted to live. It was kind of scary back then. Then came to the point where it was, what was that, about 2002, I think it was. I was doing the show Bounce at the Goodman Theater. Steve Sondheim, David Caddick, who was the conductor, and Kristen Blodgett, the associate at the time, they all talked me into taking a weekend off and going to New York to see what it was like. So I did that, and it was nothing like I remember. And somehow I got all of the gigs I had in Chicago, because there were several at the time, regular gigs. They all agreed to somehow 7 months. If I went to New York and in 7 months I didn't like it, I could come back to my regular gigs.
Oh my God.
So at that point, I was like, well, how could I not? So I did it, and obviously I never went back and then retired, at the beginning of the pandemic.
Wow. That is incredible. Do you have a musical family?
No, I don't. That's the weird part is, okay, when I was a little kid, I mean, this is before kindergarten, anything. I don't know if you remember this, there used to be a commercial for the 101 greatest classics of all time with this white-haired gentleman, very distinguished, talking about it. And I wanted that album. I still have it to this day. My parents got that for me. And I always had this love of classical music. Nobody else in the house, they called it the long-haired stuff.
Mhm.
It's, so they had no idea. And even in the car, my dad we never listened to music. It
Mhm.
was the strangest thing.
Mhm.
But somehow that's just I had to play. And that's somehow it was in there and had to come out.
Hmm, for sure. It seems like you were completely self-motivated, like you just wanted to do it.
Yes. Oh, totally. In Lockport, where I'm from, the Lockport Music Center, the teacher named Jim Colby, he was my first teacher, and he took me up till about eighth grade.
Mhm.
And he also played clarinet and flute. Now, once I got into high school, through the Lockport Music Center, there was a Jerry Linich and Bill Linich had a big band that they played with every now and then, not regular basis, but they'd do a gig. So they asked me to join them in high school. So my teacher, I was sitting next to my teacher then that I had all through grade school. And that's when I actually started. A friend of mine in high school said, "Hey, have you ever heard of Fred Hemke?" Which I had no idea what classical saxophone even was at that point.
Hmm.
She said, you should, look into lessons with this guy." And I had no way to get there, and everything. I was a sophomore in high school at that point. So this wonderful person who I've been trying to find ever since, which I can't, she used to take me up once a month to all the way to Evanston, about an hour and 20 minutes or so, for a saxophone lesson with Hemke.
Oh my gosh.
All she did is say, if you can help me, if you can pay for the gas, I'll take you, which
Wow.
she did every once a month
That
for
is so special.
right? Because that's what changed my everything for me, is that and getting into Northwestern. Because if it wasn't for her, getting me hooked up with Fred Hemke, I would have probably not gone to Northwestern, and then everything would have been very, very different for me. It's interesting to think back on those little things, how one thing could have changed your entire life.
Correct. And the oboe is a key to it because it really kept you employed and tripling or quadrupling or but doubling essentially kept you
Right.
employed.
Yes. Yep, it really did. And that, again, the smartest thing I've ever done, because that's what I became known for.
Mhm.
And I had worked hard all the years. I moved to New York in October of '03.
Mhm.
And until the last few years I was there, I was hardly ever able to play anything other than an oboe doubling book. But the last few years, I had started subbing on some other shows in between the shows I was doing, and I was able to start subbing on some of the flute books. And I then at that point I was subbing on like 8 different books at the
Oh,
same time. I mean, literally the most shows I've played, 7 different shows in an 8 show week, seven
oh,
completely different shows, which was crazy. I couldn't do that now,
oh my God.
but
That's
yeah,
crazy. That's a
it
lot.
was pretty nuts.
How did you learn woodwind repair?
Well, back at the Lockport Music Store, when uh, when I first started high school, I started working there between eighth grade and freshman year in high school. So I worked there all through high school, behind the counter and teaching lessons.
Mhm.
Plus, they had no repairman because the older person who had owned it was the repairman. He
Mhm.
did basic repairs. He taught me some basic stuff back then.
Mhm.
So in high school, I was able to do little odds and ends for people that needed little things. Then, once I got out of college and started working at Candlelight Dinner Theater, Ed Ward, who used to be president of the Musicians Union, I met him my first show at Candlelight was Gypsy. He was the trumpet player. Later on, he said, "Hey, we need an extra repair person. Would you be interested in learning repairs?" And I told him the story. He goes, "Well, Tommy Baranek, who's a bass player, did the repairs there."
Mhm.
And crazy Tommy. We had so much fun. But he taught me the rest, and then I just started looking in, books and things. And then at a couple points, I had uh, he lived in Michigan at the time, Eldred Spell, who
Mhm.
was amazing flute repair and restorer. And I would go up once every 6 weeks or so. I took lessons from him for a while. And Carlos Coelho down in Indianapolis taught me a few things, and worked at the bandstand doing repairs for a few years there. And then you had offered me, said, "Hey, so that's when I went and started working for you after the bandstand."
Hmm. Wow. Do you have a story or something about your performing in New York or something that's like magical to you that you would like to share?
I still remember, now I'm gonna cry. I still remember the first time I played. I went there with the American Girls show, like I said, and then I started immediately getting calls as soon as I got there from all these doublers, for work. So the first show I subbed on was Taboo, the Boy George musical. And I still remember coming out and then calling my best friend in back in Chicago and saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe it! I just played on Broadway." So that was really sorry.
Okay.
That brings back a lot of memories. That was probably overall the most amazing thing. But then, two, my last was it 3 years or 4 years there, I also won the audition for Radio City Christmas Show. So I did that the last three, I think it was 3 years, possibly four, but there when I was there. So that was just a blast. It was so
Oh,
much fun. And then also, as I'm thinking about these things, the last 6 or 7 years I was in New York, I played the Tony Awards.
oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, most people don't know this, but most of the Tonys is actually recorded.
Oh,
All the big numbers, is recorded. Some of them, the lead vocals are not recorded; those are live. Some of them are, some of them aren't. On that,
hmm. Did not know that. They do a good job of putting it together.
they do a great job. They really do. It's pretty amazing.
Hmm.
Now, the one thing I didn't know, and I always wondered on shows like that in the Academy Awards, does the band know who wins? No, they do not. We have a page with, say, there's 5 different shows up for whatever award. We have a page with 2 or 3 lines of music from each show, and it's numbered 1 to 5. As soon as they announce the winner, the conductor yells out a number and literally goes 3, and you go.
Oh.
You have that much time. You just have to go.
If somebody was listening to this podcast and said, your journey is amazing and I would love to play a wind instrument, what would you say to them to get them to do it right now?
First of all, I would say, well, is there an instrument you've always thought about, or is, oh, that's a cool instrument, or something like that? That's the instrument for you. Because, like I say, I wanted to start on flute, but I was not allowed to, especially for an adult, because we don't have the restrictions of having parents say no. Just pick what you enjoy, give it a try.
Mhm.
What's the worst that can happen? Oh, I don't like that one. I'll try this one. And almost everybody's going to find something they like.
Mhm.
I would think.
Yeah.